I just got back from the annual meeting of the ETS. This year was in Denver. And I was reminded when I was looking around the book room that I hadn't talked about the Greek New Testament that the folks at the Tyndale House in Cambridge have produced. And I really wanted to let you know about this. And just up front, I really like this. I just think it has some real strong advantages. And it's especially good for people who just want to spend time reading their Greek. What you'll find is that if you want to do intensive text critical work and commentary level work, you'll still need a Nestle a lot for all their footnotes. But if your goal is just to be able to read the text and to work in the text, to preach from the text, and even to teach from the text, this is a really good solution. It's published by Crossway in the U.S., and the first thing you notice when you pick one up is it's just typical Crossway. It's just been beautifully printed. It's a nice leather cover, but more than that, the paper is fantastic. The paper is thicker. You can't see through it quite as easily, and if you're going to write yourself notes on it, the ink tends not to bleed through. I just can't stand it when I'm reading any book, actually, and all the underlinings and stuff are coming through the page, and they're just not going to do that with this paper. So it's a very, very good paper, beautifully, beautifully bound. The leather doesn't lie open real easily, and my guess is that through time that the binding will loosen up a bit and it will lie open. They also make it in hardback, and the hardback is identical on the insides, and it lies open really, really nicely. None of them are as good as the Nestle Elant, which even if you're at the very beginning of the book, it stays open. But what I've never liked about Nestle Elant, and UBS for that fact, is the paper is so thin. I think it's Bible paper, and you can just see through it. And boy, if you mark in it or underline it, it comes right through, which has always bothered me. But this is it's just a beautiful text. And let me just give you some of the background to it. I ran into Peter Williams a couple of years ago when they were still working on this, and he was kind of laying down the specifics of what they're trying to do. And in fact, there's a real short preface and a much longer discussion of the textbook in the back, of the Bible in the back. And so you can see what they're doing. But the number one thing that they're doing that I really like is that they're giving primary weight to the ancient, to the oldest manuscripts, so Nitticus and Vaticanus and some of those older manuscripts. We all know in text critical circles that those manuscripts are by default more accurate. They're closer to the event. There's been less time for them to be changed. The editors showed less of a propensity to change. And when I'm reading this, I feel like I'm one step closer to those oldest and most reliable manuscripts, and that's a really good thing. The editors were very restrained on how they laid it out. There's a minimum of punctuation, a minimum of putting. Well, they have verses in there, but they're not as obtrusive. They don't stand out. It's interesting. The paragraphs are much bigger, which the Tyndale folks say makes it less interpretive, and that's good. And they looked at hints in the ancient manuscripts as to where the paragraphing should be. The other thing that they did was they didn't standardize spelling, and I'm so thankful for that. I did not realize that Nestle Elant standardized spelling, and they tended to put new movables on the end of forms. They tended to spell words the same way. But, one scribe may have tended to spell the name John with one new, and other scribes may have tended, or in other manuscripts actually, may have tended to spell the name John with two news. And I want to see that in the text. And I don't like the standardization that happens. And so I'm very thankful that they don't do that. In terms of the Greek text, they started with the work of Tregellus. I'm not quite sure how to say that name, Tregellus, a Greek scholar, died in 1875. And it became a part of Westcott and Hort's work, and then that later affected the Nestle Elant text. But they started with that, and their primary thing they looked at in terms of text critical work is they looked at external issues of age. the older manuscripts are by default going to be more reliable. And so that's one of their text critical principles. Their other principle, though, internally, was yes, they still follow things like the more difficult reading and whatnot, but because this is so much closer to the ancient texts, they've preserved scribal tendencies. And as you look at the scribe of one book versus the scribe that maybe wrote manuscripts of another biblical book, those scribes have tendencies. Like some tended to harmonize more than others tended to harmonize. And so you see them using their understanding of scribal tendencies in their text critical work. And I appreciate that. It's one reason I like the Net Bible so much. I know Dan Wallace did all the text critical work for the New Testament. Dan puts more weight on internal evidence than he does external, as I recall. But what you get are slightly different textual notes. So you get one set in the Nestle-Aland, and you get another set of preferences in the Net Bible, another set of preferences here. It's just nice to see what different world-class text criticals people, what they think. And so I don't want there to be just one. I like seeing what different people have written. Again, the thing about this text that I love the most, though, is so readable. I mean, it cries out to be read, all right? The paper, the font, the leading, I mean, all this stuff just says, just sit down and read some Greek with me today. It's what it's saying, and I really appreciate that. The other thing I wanted to do, though, for you is to take a look at the Nestle-Aland text and the Tyndale text and kind of see what are the kinds of differences that you're going to encounter. So I'm going to use Accordance, and Accordance has a great compare feature, and I'm going to just show you some of the ways in which Tyndale's different from Nestle-Aland. Okay? All right. So here I've pulled up the pastoral epistles to compare. Nestle-Aland's over here, Tyndale's over on the right side. And first of all, you're going to notice a lot of indications of differences that really aren't important. Apparently, the NA28 has a tab here, and there's no tab over here in Tyndale. So some of the markings that you see in Accordance aren't really important. But here you get the first one. Nestle-Aland capitalizes Christos. The Tyndale House lowercases it. So there's going to be a difference in capitalization. Here you can see that Tyndale has a comma. And of course, when I say Tyndale, I mean the Tyndale House folks, not Tyndale the translator. But they have a comma here, and there's no comma over here in the Nestle-Aland, which, by the way, is going to change some accents. What you're going to have is in Nestle-Aland, when there's no comma, you're going to have a grave accent if the last syllable is accented. And over in Tyndale, because there is a comma, the grave is not going to be there. It's going to be an acute. So one of the differences. So you've got a little bit of punctuation. You've got a little issue of capitalization. Scroll down here just a bit. Here you have in 1 Timothy 1:9, you'll notice a new movable. Here you don't have any. I really don't like that. I wish if the ancient manuscripts, the oldest manuscripts didn't have a new, you shouldn't put it in the text. Now, the other thing you'll notice that Nestle-Aland does use the iota subscript in the middle part of the word, and over here in Tyndale, that has been dropped out. Scroll down a little bit more. Here you see Nestle-Aland has elided the alpha on Allah. Tyndale has included the alpha. Okay, what I've done here is that I've just selected certain verses to show you more substantial changes or differences. And I also reset Accordance's preferences not to show every little change. But this is helpful. Nestle-Aland, they include the chi, but they put it in brackets because it's textually uncertain. Tyndale decided to leave it out. And by the way, I should say that you're not going to find anything in Tyndale that you won't find in Nestle-Aland. Where they're different, Nestle-Aland's going to have Tyndale's reading in the footnote. So it's not like Tyndale has gone out and found whole new readings that Nestle-Aland is unaware of. So anyway, that's really important to notice. In 1 Timothy 3:14, you'll see that they've got the prepositional phrase that Paul wants to come and see Timothy quickly. Over here, it's tachyon, it's the actual adverb. In 5:5, Tyndale includes the article. Over Nestle-Aland, it's omitted. Now here's a real change. Nestle-Aland has this as a present active indicative. Tyndale went with the variant, which is present middle indicative. You can see the parsing in the bottom part of the screen. In 5:16, it's a present active imperative. In Tyndale, it's a present middle imperative. So a couple of significant changes there. In 2 Timothy 2:14, you can see that it's theos in Nestle-Aland, it's kurios in Tyndale. So again, a variant, but an important one. In 3:12, you have an inversion. In Nestle-Aland, you have the adverb followed by the infinitive. Over here in Tyndale, they have the infinitive and then an adverb. In 2 Timothy 4:10, you can see a spelling difference. It's a simple iota here. It's epsilon iota here. In 2 Timothy 4:13, you have a spelling difference, alpha iota versus epsilon. And here it's iota versus epsilon iota. Going down into Titus, in 2:14, you actually have a difference. In the Tyndale, it's present active indicative. In Nestle-Aland, it's present active subjunctive. And finally, just because this was my doctoral dissertation, so I want to talk about as much as I can, on polygenesia, on Titus 3:5, Nestle-Aland keeps the double gammas as gamma gamma, but the Tyndale folks go to nu gamma. It's just a spelling difference, not a big deal. So hopefully that's helpful to kind of give you a feel for the difference. Not tremendous differences. The footnotes in the Tyndale and in the Nestle-Aland will agree with each other. You're going to be able to see what the other one is doing. But for me, just my daily reading of Greek, my studying of Greek, I really like this. And where it's different from Nestle-Aland, I'm going to see it down here in the apparatus and be able to make my own decision. So that's it for the Greek New Testament from the Tyndale House in Cambridge, published by Crossway in the States. Enjoy it.